What's up, everybody? Nick Powles, publisher of 1851franchise.com. We're talking with Modern Market coming up next on another episode of Meet the Zor. All right, Chris, I'm really excited for your perspective, and it's going to be for two reasons. One is the depth of your career. And in most people, if I say depth of career, that means they switch jobs every 5 years. Yours is not like that. Your depth of career is you've been involved with brands, you stick it out, you're loyal with them, you get them to that next level. And so you've seen so many different categories or variations of food as it relates to franchising. So my first question is I want you to position your backdrop, because I think is important to any candidate that is watching this. And then talk about, with all this knowledge base, what excited you when you got into Modern Market, and maybe somewhat of a state of the union of where the brand's at today.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I'm happy to join you. I have been doing this almost exactly 20 years to the month. Background was not in restaurants, but I entered the industry coming from software engineering. I started as a consultant to a startup brand in 2003 and fell in love with it so much that I joined full time. And that was a pure startup brand, 4 company-owned units. We grew it to 50 with the usual story, right? A couple of hundred additional commitments. And from that point in time, I moved on to my first larger company opportunity with Bruegger's Bagels in the industry, first private equity-backed company. And so I've been in kind of, I would call, the fast casual, quick serve category of restaurant franchising, always on the franchisor side, from companies as small as starting with 4 units to a multi-unit, multi-brand shared services franchisor that had 1,500 units across 5 brands in 17 countries, and which was subsequently sold to a publicly traded company. I've known the Modern Market brand and founders going back to 2019. And really what I like about what Modern Market is, because at the end of the day, to grow a brand, yes, you've got to have great food, and there has to be meaningful differentiation in food and service style. But if you're growing a brand through franchising, all of those have to tie into unit economics. And that's not something I knew early in my career, right? Early in my career, not having a background in restaurants, not having owned or run restaurants, I thought, boy, if we have great food and a very cool environment with a nice fireplace and hip employees, that we could grow by way of franchising. And then you quickly learn you can to a point, but then unit economics or lack of unit economics catch up to you. And so what I liked about Modern is, and still is the same thing today, we are delivering scratch-made, sustainably sourced food in a fast casual setting. That's the food part. The unit economic part is through menu engineering, our food cost and our labor cost all in or below 50%, according to our FDD. We are doing this in a square footage footprint that likely averages about 2,700 square feet. Our newest franchise opening in Kansas City back in December is 2,400 square feet. So again, our footprint, all of our units are leased. We're not buying dirt and building buildings. So it's important that your P&L isn't burdened with this very large occupancy cost on it. And so when you're looking at the types of centers and the demographics we're chasing, it's incumbent upon us to make sure we keep that square footage aligned with what the unit economic model will support. And so for me, what I've learned over the years and what's great about Modern is that the unit economics of the model work. At the same time, we have a menu that was designed by our 2 co-founders with this premise in mind, to be a restaurant that you could eat at as an individual every single day. And 2 things. One is you could have something different, and 2, feel good about what it was that you ate when you left. And that's why we talk about faster food can be better food. And oftentimes, we look at the elevator speech. Someone says, what does Modern Market do? Is it a grocery store? What is it? And I tend to use one of our largest competitors in that example. My example is, it would be if you merged a Panera Bread with a Whole Foods, right? On a smaller square footage. That's what, in the essence, Modern is. And for people who've never experienced it or aren't aware of it, that last little analogy that I used tends to resonate with people, and I think goes a long way to explaining exactly what it is that we do.
Okay, so a few things that I want to unpack from there. One is unit level economics. You go back to the first brand that you worked with when you got into franchising. You leave software and get into franchising. If you were to flash back, then did you understand just the power of the unit level economics as it related to franchise sales? Because obviously you had success with that brand, and it was probably because it had it. But did you realize that, like, at what point in your career did you realize that is the unit level economics on both cost to operate and how much you can make has to be sound in order to award franchises? At what point did that turn and become more of a powerful tool that you had to have as a check mark?
Very good question. So I think, having some level of financial background prior to getting into restaurant franchising, I was certainly aware that franchisees were investing their hard-earned dollars and personally guaranteeing loans and leases for the hope of return on investment. So we certainly understood that. I think what I learned very quickly is we did two things there that I think in hindsight were missteps. One is, our first 4 units were like 2,800 square feet. This was early 2000s, and you had the emergence of Panera and Jason's Deli and McAllister's building 4,000 square foot units. And so we, in our thought process, said, well, Shazam, let's build bigger units to drive bigger sales. That's not always the case, number one. And number two, the big mistake and brands make this today, is as you move away from your home market, you can't assume you're going to generate the same average unit volumes when you're an early stage brand. And so as a 4-unit brand in North Carolina, had our very first franchisee open in Brookfield, Wisconsin, and our second one in Huntsville, Alabama, and our third one in, I think, Fort Collins, Colorado. In the back of your mind is like, people love our food. It's great food. The environment's awesome. And we're doing these unit volumes in our home market. You make the assumption as you approve new sites that you're going to see that level of performance. In other words, you don't have a factor of safety for that franchisee when they open in a far remote market. And that's one strategy we could talk about on a later call. But when they open in a remote market, if they're building a big restaurant of yours and rent is significant, it's more challenging from a distribution perspective to get product to them, which can drive cost. And at the franchisor level, it can be challenging to support them. So, not understanding or leaving in or analyzing the factor of safety when you go to remote markets or even your home market as an early stage brand. So those are really the two things that were big takeaways for me that I would have to say I wasn't eyes wide open on those going in.
Why do you think the candidate? So I mean, you and I could probably pull 100 different brands where if you and I look at the P&L, we're like, it's somewhat upside down. They're probably selling on home market data, which means the expectation of the operator when they open in non-home territory, they're frustrated. Yet people continue to buy it. In franchising, is that a lack of education by the buyer? Is it because we get excited by shiny new things? Like why do bad businesses, not necessarily awful businesses, but ones that aren't a top performer, why do they get lift in today's market with so much information that's available?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go back to my software days to give you an example. I'd like to talk in examples, but it's my opinion that as Americans, we feel a lot of FOMO and peer pressure. We want to run with the herd, right? And we saw that in my early days in software sales. If the chief technology officer of the Fortune 500 company down the street talked to his buddy who was CTO of another Fortune 500 company, and one had bought our software, the other one had to buy it, just wanted to buy it. Now, I had responsibility back then internationally. You look at buyers in Europe of software, not franchises, very conservative in their analysis of new software. They would build a 10-year model before making any decisions on this new software. And then in the Asia Pacific realm, they were somewhere in between. They liked the latest and greatest, but they also didn't want to get burned by the latest and greatest. So I think some of it is just the nature of Americans wanting to run with the herd or fear of missing out on an opportunity. I think you see that. Now, I think it's also incumbent on the franchisor to bring that franchisee in or not with their eyes wide open. In other words, a phrase that I've used often is when I'm talking to a franchise candidate, and our focus at Modern, by the way, is on existing multi-unit restaurant owners. So they get this. But I've worked at other brands that where that wasn't the target candidate, and they became great franchisees too. But I think it's incumbent upon you in those situations. It's almost like an anti-sale to make sure that franchise candidate is aware that, depending on the restaurant, service style of the restaurant, type of the restaurant, there may be a period of time after you open where money is going in one direction, and that's away from you, not in your direction. Be prepared for that, right? Because what I've seen, this was the other thing I learned in my very first restaurant company, is when franchisees come into systems that don't have a restaurant background, there's a lot of time, energy, and effort, stress, sleepless nights getting up to that store opening, right? And then the excitement of the store opening, and they're working and they're driving hard. In the first 6 months, they're feeling very, very fulfilled as a franchise owner, and then they hit the wall. It happens for all of them. It's about 6 to 8 months in, they hit the wall. If they hit the wall and they're making money, cash flow is positive, that's one thing. But if they hit that wall and they've been losing money for 6 months and weren't expecting to, then the franchisor is at high risk of losing that unit that just opened and that franchisee. And so I think it's incumbent upon the franchisor, this is sort of a general statement across all brands, not necessarily just food brands, to make sure that the new franchisee comes in eyes wide open of what's going to happen in those first 6 months, that you may not be cash flow positive right away. You will physically and emotionally hit a wall at about 6 to 8 months, and that's okay. That's why we, the franchisor, are here to support you and pick you up. So I think it's great to do that. I think it's, again, my very first job, the guy hired me who had started the brand because I had a relationship-based sales background. We were selling software that was $1 million to $3 million back in 1997, 98, 2000 to C-level engineering executives at Fortune 1000 companies. You had to build a relationship based on trust and credibility in order for them to invest that much with you and their careers in a decision with you. And so I've always had that as a baseline in my, if you want to call it selling career, is you have to have credibility and trust with the buyer. And can you close deals, i.e. transactions, faster in other ways in the business? Sure you can. But we've all seen the brands that go rocket and plop, right? Or they have what, you've heard the classic SNOs, sold but never open, right? So 200 units under commitment or under development, or 500 units under commitment. And they open 10 or 25 of those. So I just think it's incumbent for you to make sure that franchisees coming into the system, if they in fact come in with eyes wide open, but you have to do it in a way that you're not an Eeyore about every deal. Otherwise, you're not closing anything.
This is not me blowing smoke by any means. I'm going to give credit where credit is due. But ultimately, and I know this about where you've gone in your career because we've worked together at a few different places. Mm-hmm. You don't take jobs for the sake of taking jobs. You align it with something that you believe has some growth potential. And so when I look at it, listen to everything you just said, think about you as a human, I would say there's tremendous value in the Chris Cheek seal of approval. And the fact that you're here and saying I'm willing to put my name on this brand means you really believe in it. Do you think that carries weight, or has that carried weight in you getting the story out there at an early stage? Because, I mean, in some situations, I'll bet on the jockey and not on the horse. And if you're the jockey in this sense, like you're telling me this aligns, this hits the way that you evaluate a business, does that lend credibility? Does that change the conversation to maybe more of a sophisticated buyer that's not just, chasing FOMO?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's necessarily a Chris Cheek specific thing. I think it is unless you own a company, all of us as employees, the largest asset we have is our credibility, and doing what we say we're going to do. And so I've tried to follow that thought process, throughout my career. But I think that said, it may get you a conversation. It may get you a first call. May get you a discovery day. But the brand and all aspects of it, but falling back to unit economics and potential scalability of the brand, support from the franchisor is what's going to actually close deals and lead to growth. It's not me or any other individual that sits in my seat. If you haven't been, you haven't built relationships in the industry, it's hard to attract certain candidates in the industry. But the brand still, at the end of the day, wins beyond the initial conversation, because the franchisee is not signing a personal guarantee with me or guaranteeing a lease with me. That they're doing that with their lender and their landlord, and they're building restaurants and hiring people to run those restaurants, and they need to see that there's a return. And I think now more than ever, and one of our strengths is that franchisees coming into systems want to see franchisors, and the attorneys out there don't like me saying this, by the way, that treat franchisees like partners. And at Modern, we're the largest operator of our own brand today. It's not our strategy to be that very long, but we operate 25 of our own stores. Mm-hmm. And so that gives us credibility of, hey, we're in it with you in this economy. And we were in it with you during COVID. And we have this test bed of stores in Colorado and Arizona and Texas where we can test new menu items and new systems and processes and equipment. And so, for example, just back in November, we opened our very first drive-through unit. It's a company-owned store. We wanted to make all the mistakes we could make with it before our first franchisee ever tried a drive-through. And it's full menu. And many are saying, hey, you're crazy to do that. But we're like, let us do it. Let us make the mistakes. We think it's the right thing to do. But so we're the largest operator of our own brand. So there's a credibility aspect there. At the end of the day, it's not about me or anybody else in this role. It's that just gets you just 20% of the way there, maybe.
Yeah. Well, look, I when I'm evaluating a business, I'm going to give you my insight. One is just the fundamentals, which seem to come true or come up. And if I ask any multi-unit operator, and a multi-unit operator, I would say I use that term as north of 3 units. Someone that's building up a portfolio. I say, okay, tell me how you evaluate a brand. It's always point of differentiation on the product, vision from the leadership, and is the leadership team good? Like, do I believe in the leadership team? Cost to get in, how much I can make, where are you growing, and what is your growth plan, and what does validation look like? If I
Right.
swing it over to a good franchisor that's evaluating the candidate, they're evaluating candidate on financial bandwidth. Can they actually open up 3 of these? It doesn't mean they're going to have to sign a 3-unit deal, but it's like get one open, have enough money for a rainy day, and have enough money for scale. Like
Right.
that's the way that you're evaluating it. And then on grit, hustle, and personality, like the no a-hole
Yeah.
rule ends up being valuable. So now that the foundation is set, you've obviously put the pieces in place. It's the playbook that you've put in place before. What's the vision plan for 2024?
We began 2024, and I will have to, in my head, I'm doing adjustments because our fiscal year runs October to September. So for me, my operating fiscal year has 3 more quarters left in it, not 4 quarters like everybody else or many others, right? So we will grow from 29 units to approximately 37 units by the end of this year. And then next year, our 5-year plan is quadrupling of the store count from 29. We, in that grouping of stores that will open this year that I just referenced, we'll open 2 non-traditional units at a minimum. One will be in Atlanta Airport, and the other will be in a major university in the Northeast. And we already have that in our portfolio. We've got University of Notre Dame operates a Modern Market on campus where University of Notre Dame is actually the licensee. And then we have 2 licensed units in the Denver airport.
Yeah.
And so that will be in that grouping of at the end of the fiscal year will be around 37 units. And we are, as we grow, we're seeking to focus on Colorado as our core market for growth for company-owned stores. Still a lot of room left there. We can grow. And we're looking at putting, for example, our Dallas stores in the hands of great multi-unit operator who will commit to developing additional stores. That's what we did in Austin over a year ago with our very first franchisee. Thrive Restaurant Group, 3rd largest Applebee's franchisee in the system, acquired our 3 existing company-owned stores in Austin, committed to build 41 units for us over a 7-year time frame. They will have opened 3 of those new units by May of this year. They just opened their first in Kansas City, middle of December. Second one in downtown Kansas City, first part of March. Third one will be in Iowa in last part of May. So they're up and moving and rocking, and they've got, a large commitment with us and for us. And, and I will say that not all multi-unit candidates are created equal. And what I mean by that is that, listen, we're an early stage brand. So if you're going to bring a Modern Market eatery to an Atlanta or to Nashville, we're not coming in there running TV ads on the Super Bowl. Right? We're just not. That's not us. It's not our size. So there are large multi-unit franchisees, you know them, that had been wildly successful by developing, building, and buying brands that are very large in scale and have very large advertising funds to drive that. That's great. And then there are franchisees, multi-unit franchisees. They may own some of those brands I just mentioned, but also have been very good at taking a brand like a Modern when it's at our stage and bringing it into their market, knowing that that's a different market entry than them bringing in, for example, a Taco Bell.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think it's on the franchisor side, as you're looking for new franchisees, it's important to be able to determine that not all multi-unit franchisees, while wildly successful in whatever they're doing, are created equal relative to taking a growth brand like Modern without market awareness into a new market. Putting the business on their back from an awareness building perspective is what I call it.
Well, look, at the end of the day, you take the corporate footprint and you take early indicators from franchisee 1, corporate or franchisee is not going to continue to develop restaurants unless they've engineered a profit. Like at some point you just stop doing it and you stop wasting money if it's not working. And so that's where like the early insights, you might not have the market penetration or awareness yet, but the indicators are showing like proof of concept and what's coming off. And I think that's a tremendous indicator. So Well, Chris, thanks for sharing some of the story again. This is starting to frame the discussion, and I appreciate you sharing some of that with us today.
Sure. Awesome. Love it. Thank you.
Yeah. For Chris, I'm Nick. This is another episode of Meet the Zor.